World War II wasn't just a conflict of soldiers and tanks, it was a time of unprecedented technological advancements that reshaped the way warfare was conducted. Among the many innovations that emerged, artillery underwent a transformation that forever changed the battlefield. But what if I told you that some of these changes were so radical, they not only impacted the war but also shaped the very artillery systems we use today? In this video, we're diving into 5 key innovations that redefined artillery during the Second World War. From game-changing fuses to the rise of mobile artillery, these breakthroughs not only altered the course of the war, but also paved the way for the future of warfare. Let's begin with one of the most significant, an innovation that dramatically improved the effectiveness of anti-aircraft guns, turning the tide against enemy aircraft in the skies. In January 1943, the USS Helena fired one of the most groundbreaking weapons of the war. It was an anti-aircraft shell equipped with a proximity fuse, a technological marvel that would revolutionize artillery forever. But how did a small piece of technology hidden inside a shell make such an enormous difference? The proximity fuse was the result of years of research and development, particularly the TISAD mission in 1940, where Britain shared their experimental work on proximity fuses with the United States. The breakthrough came when a simple concept using radar waves to detect objects was miniaturized and integrated into an artillery shell. The fuse was small enough to fit inside the nose of a shell, using a tiny radar system that could detect the presence of a target in close proximity. When the shell neared its target, it would detonate automatically, increasing accuracy and lethality. Before the proximity fuse, anti-aircraft fire was often inaccurate, with artillery shells missing their targets by hundreds of meters. But the fuse changed all of that, increasing the kill rate of anti-aircraft guns by 5 to 10 times. In Britain, the proximity fuse helped to defend against the V-1 flying bombs, improving kill rates from just 24% to an astonishing 79% in a matter of months. In the Pacific theater, the fuse proved invaluable against Japanese aircraft and kamikaze attacks, giving Allied forces a significant advantage in air defense. But its greatest impact came on the ground during the Battle of the Bulge. The proximity fuse was used in ground combat for the first time. Airburst artillery shells, fired at high altitudes, exploded over enemy positions, raining shrapnel down on infantry with deadly precision. General Patton himself claimed that the proximity fuse was one of the key factors in the success of the battle, as it not only reduced wasted fire but also improved accuracy, forcing the enemy to rethink their tactics. The proximity fuse became a symbol of how science and innovation could change the course of war. Its success in World War II would forever shape post-war artillery design, pushing the boundaries of what artillery could achieve. But while the proximity fuse was transforming air defense, there was another innovation taking artillery to new heights, one that would change the very way artillery moved on the battlefield. In the fast-paced world of armored warfare, speed and mobility became as important as firepower, and in the chaos of battle, artillery could often lag behind the rapidly advancing tanks and infantry. To solve this problem, a revolutionary idea was born. Artillery mounted on tank chassis. Self-propelled guns were about to change the battlefield, but how did these vehicles transform ground combat so drastically? Before World War II, artillery was typically towed behind vehicles or horses, requiring time to reposition and often getting stuck in the mud or delayed by the slow pace of infantry. However, the new self-propelled guns combined the devastating power of traditional artillery with the mobility of tanks, giving armies the ability to move, fire, and quickly reposition. This ability to shoot and scoot was a game-changer in warfare. The Americans quickly recognized the potential and developed the M7 Priest, which mounted a 105mm howitzer on the chassis of the M3 Lee and later the Sherman tank. The Germans followed suit with the 150mm Hummel mounted on the Panzer III chassis and even created the Stag III, which became one of the most iconic self-propelled guns of the war. It wasn't just a self-propelled artillery piece, it was also a tank destroyer and infantry support vehicle, able to adapt to a variety of combat situations. The Soviet Union, not to be outdone, created their own self-propelled guns, such as the US 276, which were simpler and cheaper to produce, yet incredibly effective. These self-propelled guns were smaller, lighter, and more mobile, making them a valuable addition to the Red Army's artillery arsenal. While they had limited traverse capabilities due to their casement-style design, their ability to quickly change position and provide continuous fire support made them vital in the Soviet offensive. The mobility of these vehicles gave armies the ability to deliver accurate fire support wherever it was needed, whether on the move or after a breakthrough. Self-propelled guns allowed commanders to keep artillery in the thick of the action, able to respond to changing battlefronts with lightning speed. The rapid mobility meant that artillery could be used as both a defensive and offensive weapon, turning the tide in numerous battles. They could provide long-range support while keeping pace with advancing infantry and tanks, helping to exploit breakthroughs before the enemy had time to regroup. But the impact wasn't just tactical self-propelled guns, also had strategic significance. They reduced the need for large numbers of horse-drawn supply wagons, easing logistical strain and providing protection for the crew. By war's end, both the Allies and the Soviets had produced over 227,000 tanks and self-propelled guns, cementing their place as essential elements of modern warfare. The success of these vehicles laid the foundation for post-war self-propelled artillery systems, which continue to evolve into the highly effective platforms used by modern armies today. The self-propelled gun's success came down to the perfect combination of firepower, mobility, and protection, all essential elements in the fast-paced and ever-changing world of armored combat. But as artillery became faster and more flexible, another innovation was quietly changing the way artillery was coordinated, turning artillery into a more precise, powerful tool for battlefield dominance. While self-propelled guns brought mobility to artillery, there was another crucial innovation that took artillery precision and coordination to a level never before seen on the battlefield: the Fire Direction Center. But how did a simple organizational and computational concept change artillery from a scattered force into a coordinated powerhouse? Before World War II, artillery units often struggled with inefficiency in fire control, especially when coordinating multiple batteries. Gun positions were often calculated manually, with lengthy delays and an increased risk of errors. But in the 1,930 seconds at the U.S. Field Artillery School at Fort Sill, Carlos Brewer and his team developed a solution that would change the way artillery operated forever: the Fire Direction Center, FDC. The Fire Direction Center became the nerve center for artillery operations. All calculations related to firing range, azimuth, elevation, propellant type, weather conditions, and altitude were centralized in one location. This consolidation allowed artillery units to fire with much greater precision, as the FDC could quickly calculate the necessary corrections for each shot, drastically reducing the time spent on target calculations. In practical terms, this meant that artillery could support fast-moving operations in a way that wasn't possible before. Artillery battalions were no longer acting independently. They could now be synchronized with other units, increasing their impact. By 1941, every U.S. artillery battalion had its own fire direction center, and divisional and corps-level centers allowed for even greater coordination. This innovation led to faster fire support and increased firepower flexibility, enabling artillery to be used in new and creative ways. One of the most famous tactics made possible by the Fire Direction Center was the time on target (TOT) barrage, pioneered by the British during the North African campaign. This technique ensured that shells from multiple batteries would land on a target at the same exact moment. By coordinating the fire of different batteries and calculating the precise time it would take each shell to reach its target, the FDC allowed for an overwhelming concentration of firepower, denying defenders time to react or take cover. The results were devastating. The TOT barrage quickly became a standard tactic, and it was instrumental in many key battles. During the Battle of the Bulge, for example, 3 divisions of U.S. forces, a total of 129 guns, were coordinated through a single fire direction center. The massed artillery fire was so effective that it is credited with causing the heavy losses suffered by the German forces. But the fire direction center's impact wasn't just tactical, it also improved safety on the battlefield. By centralizing calculations, the FDC helped to reduce friendly fire incidents by verifying gun positions and ensuring that artillery was fired from safe and effective locations. It also allowed for the rapid shifting of fire, giving commanders the flexibility to adapt to changing battlefield conditions. By the end of the war, up to 60% of U.S. casualties inflicted on the enemy were caused by artillery. The Fire Direction Center played a pivotal role in ensuring that this firepower was used to its fullest potential. It wasn't just a technical achievement, it was a shift in how artillery was viewed and utilized, transforming it from a secondary weapon into a decisive force on the battlefield. But while artillery was growing more accurate and coordinated, a new form of weaponry was making its debut on the battlefield, one that would forever change the nature of firepower. That weapon was rocket artillery. While traditional artillery had long been the backbone of ground combat, World War II saw the introduction of an entirely new form of weaponry: rocket artillery. These weapons, which prioritized volume and speed over precision, were initially viewed with skepticism, but they would soon prove to be a game-changer on the battlefield. But what was it about these seemingly crude weapons that made them so effective, and why did they strike fear into the hearts of enemy soldiers? Rocket artillery was a departure from the traditional tube-based artillery. Instead of firing shells from a barrel, rocket artillery launched multiple rockets in rapid succession, creating devastating salvos that could saturate a target area with explosives. The Soviet Union and Germany led the charge in rocket artillery development, producing systems that would become iconic. The Soviet BM-13 Kashir, often mounted on trucks like the ZIS-6 or the Lend-Lease Studebaker, became the symbol of Soviet rocket artillery. By the end of the war, over 10,000 BM-13 launchers had been built. These launchers could fire a devastating barrage of rockets, overwhelming enemy defenses and creating a psychological shock effect. The sheer volume of fire was the key to their success. Rather than relying on pinpoint accuracy, Soviet doctrine emphasized saturating enemy positions with rockets, ensuring that even if some shots missed, others would find their mark. The German Nebelwerfer 41, nicknamed the Moaning Mini by Allied troops due to the eerie sound it made when firing, was another iconic rocket artillery system. It was a 6-barrel launcher that could fire 15 centimeters rockets at a rapid rate. The Nebelwerfer was later upgraded to versions that could fire even heavier rockets, with the Panzerwerfer 42 being mounted on half-tracks for increased mobility. While its accuracy was not as high as traditional artillery, its strength lay in its ability to fire quickly and in large volumes. These weapons could blanket a wide area, creating massive explosions that could devastate infantry, artillery, and even tanks. Despite their effectiveness, rocket artillery systems had significant drawbacks. The most glaring issue was their inaccuracy. The rockets didn't have the precision of conventional artillery shells, which meant that they couldn't always be relied on to hit specific targets. The reload times were slow, and the launchers often had limited mobility, making them vulnerable to counterattacks. However, these weaknesses were often mitigated by the sheer volume of fire and the psychological impact of the attacks. The success of rocket artillery on the Eastern Front and in the Mediterranean campaign demonstrated its potential to overwhelm the enemy. For the Soviets, the BM-13 Kushia became a vital tool in their offensives, particularly during the key breakthroughs in 1944 and 1945. Rocket artillery was used in concert with conventional artillery to create a 1-2 punch that decimated enemy positions and forced the enemy to either retreat or be wiped out. But it wasn't just the volume of fire that made these weapons effective, it was also their mobility. The ability to move quickly across the battlefield and launch a barrage of rockets before relocating was a tactic that made them difficult to target and destroy. Both the Soviet and German rocket artillery systems were designed for rapid deployment, making them a formidable force against both entrenched positions and fast-moving units. Rocket artillery would go on to influence the development of multiple rocket launcher systems in the post-war era. The mass production techniques used during World War II laid the groundwork for modern systems like the Soviet BM-21 Grad and the US Multiple Launch Rocket System, MLRS. These systems, which continue to be used today, owe much of their design to the lessons learned during World War II. Despite their effectiveness, rocket artillery's success came at a cost. It was loud, indiscriminate, and psychologically terrifying. The moaning Mini and the sound of Stalin's organ, the Kushia's screeching rockets, became feared symbols of destruction. But as the war drew to a close, the world would see another artillery innovation that pushed the limits of what was possible, a weapon so large and powerful that it would stretch the definition of artillery itself: the supergun. When we think of World War II artillery, we often picture rapid-fire cannons or rocket launchers, tearing through the battlefield with devastating precision and power. But some of the most mind-boggling artillery pieces of the war were not designed for speed or accuracy. Instead, they were built for sheer size and destructive power. These superguns were monumental feats of engineering, but despite their awe-inspiring scale, they proved to be more of a symbolic triumph than a truly effective battlefield asset. So, what was the purpose of these massive guns, and why did they fail to live up to their potential? Among the most infamous of these superguns was the German Schwere Gustav, an 800mm railway gun that weighed 1,350 tons when fully assembled. Built in the late 1932 by Krupp, this behemoth was designed to break through heavily fortified targets like the French Maginot Line or the Soviet defenses in the east. Its shells weighed a staggering 7.1 tons, and they were capable of reaching distances of up to 47 kilometers. The heavy concrete piercing shells could penetrate up to 7 meters of reinforced concrete, a feat never before accomplished by any artillery piece. But despite its size and power, the Schwere Gustav had several severe drawbacks. First and foremost, it was incredibly immobile. The gun was mounted on a railway chassis, which required reinforced tracks, special locomotives, and even a dedicated spur line to transport it to the battlefield. Moving this massive weapon required hundreds of workers, and the assembly process itself took up to 54 hours to complete. Once it reached its firing position, the gun required 250 men to operate, and its rate of fire was limited to just one round every 30 minutes due to the complexity of loading and firing. While the Gustav's size made it an impressive sight, its tactical value was minimal. It was slow to deploy, vulnerable to air attack, and ineffective against mobile targets. In fact, the gun was often forced to fire at fixed targets, such as bunkers or fortifications, because any mobile targets would likely be out of range or moved before the gun could fire. It had limited effect on the war's more fluid battlefronts, and as a result, the Scherer Gustav's deployment was largely symbolic, a demonstration of Germany's industrial might rather than a practical battlefield weapon. One of the most famous uses of the Scherer Gustav was during the 1942 siege of Sevastopol on the Crimean Peninsula, where it was employed to destroy Soviet bunkers and underground depots. However, even during this deployment, the gun's immense size and slow firing rate made it difficult to use effectively. After just 48 shots, the barrel had to be relined, and with each shot, the wear and tear on the gun was so severe that it quickly became less viable for continued use. In the end, the Scherer Gustav proved to be a failure in terms of battlefield efficiency. It was a psychological weapon, a massive propaganda piece that inspired awe, but its strategic value was limited. In a world where speed, mobility, and precision were becoming increasingly critical, superguns like the Gustav were obsolete before they could truly prove themselves. As aircraft and more mobile artillery proved far more versatile and effective, superguns faded into military history, often viewed as an example of hubris and wasted resources. Despite its failures, the Scherer Gustav was not alone in its pursuit of extreme artillery. The French had developed the cannon de 340 mm for similar purposes, and the Soviets had their own large-caliber guns, including the Schuyler Gustav's predecessor, Dora, a 600 mm railway gun. However, all these weapons shared the same limitations. They were too cumbersome, too slow, and too vulnerable to modern, more mobile warfare. The legacy of these superguns, however, can still be seen in modern artillery systems that prioritize flexibility, speed, and precision over sheer size. The world learned that in warfare, size doesn't always matter. The ability to move, adapt, and strike with precision would prove far more effective than any massive weapon could. And yet, even as superguns faded from battlefield relevance, the lessons learned from their creation had a lasting impact. They represented the extreme lengths to which nations were willing to go in their search for dominance. However, as World War II ended and artillery evolved, more efficient, mobile, and precise systems emerged, systems that would go on to shape the future of artillery and ground combat. From the lightning-fast salvos of rocket artillery to the deadly accuracy of proximity fuses and the sheer power of superguns, World War II's artillery innovations were a testament to human ingenuity. These technological advancements not only changed the way wars were fought, but also paved the way for the artillery systems we use today. But perhaps the most profound lesson they teach us is that true power on the battlefield isn't about the size or firepower of a weapon. It's about the ability to adapt, to coordinate, and to respond in real time. As the war ended, these innovations ensured that artillery would forever be an essential part of any army's arsenal. But what if the war had been fought with these innovations earlier, or with even more advanced technology? Could the course of history have changed? The answers are lost in time, but one thing is clear. Artillery in World War II was not just a tool of destruction, it was a tool that shaped the course of the war, and in many ways, the course of future warfare itself.